Hey, also, Editing Kanan here. My speed paint failed to save, and I currently have COVID, so I'm not really feeling up to making a second one. So I'm just going to be putting probably some random video game something in the background. And I also will not sound sick for the rest of the video. I recorded it before I got sick, thankfully, so that is not an issue. But I apologize for the lack of speed paint in this video. This will not be a recurring theme, so enjoy the rest of the video where I sound normal.
Hey guys, so I actually had a different video planned for this week, but it involves a poll with people explaining why they voted the way they did, and I want to give that a bit more time to be fleshed out before finalizing the video. So instead, I want to talk about what's both one of my favorite topics, but also one of the most aggravating: cults. This video is not meant to focus on one specific group, however, I will be giving examples throughout the video. I would also like to give a brief content warning for religious abuse and cults. I feel like that's pretty obvious from the title, but I just want to be very explicit that that is the entire focus of the video, and it will be going into depth on that. Before we continue, if you like my content and you want to support it, please consider subscribing and checking out my affiliate links in the description. Let's just get into the video. The word cult is often thrown around without much of a defined meaning, and there's a slew of inaccurate definitions that are commonly used to describe them. This video will mainly be using the BITE model by Steven Hassan. There are other tools used to determine if something is a cult based on the actual definition of a cult. However, this is the one I'm most familiar with, as well as the most commonly used. Before I get into what a cult actually is, I want to dispel these misunderstandings first. The most common definitions I hear to describe a cult are 1. A religious group with a living leader, often who sees themselves as divine in some way. 2. A small or new religious group. Or 3. A group with odd or unusual beliefs. Starting off with the first explanation, not only does the idea of a living leader not apply to many cults, but it also would make any early days of a modern religion a cult. For example, the way Jesus and his disciples are described in the New Testament really doesn't remotely match the way cults function. However, by this definition, early Christianity would be a cult. It also precludes many cults that do not have one or two individual leaders, or cults that are not necessarily religious in origin, such as some MLMs or alternative medicine groups. Regarding the second explanation, a small or new religious group. This again would describe the early days of any modern religion as a cult, but it also demonizes many smaller religions that do no more harm than any other religion. While I'm an anti-theist, so I don't necessarily think any religion is harmless, it's objectively true that cults are leaps and bounds more harmful than normal religions. Often because of this explanation, along with the next one, odd or unusual beliefs and practices, religions such as paganism, types of witchcraft, small or personal spiritual movements, and minority cultural beliefs such as indigenous religions, Celtic paganism, or voodoo can further be demonized by this descriptor. The final incorrect definition that I hear commonly is religions that have odd or unusual practices. Not only can this demonize minority religions like mentioned previously, but it relies on the social standard of whatever the majority religion is, and if that person is religious themselves, then their own religion. As a person who's never been religious, I find all religious practice to be odd or unusual. I do not think it is remotely normal to believe something so strongly and such massive claims without remotely any evidence. I think stopping what you're doing to pray 5 times a day, restricting what you eat without a dietary or environmental reason, wearing clothes that are physically restrictive to prevent men from sinning, being fearful of hell, etc. are all extremely odd. I do not understand, at least beyond the literal psychology of it, why people would do these things. The idea of what is odd or unusual belief or practice is entirely subjective. I do not think making a spell jar to protect you from harm is any more weird than praying to Jesus to protect you from harm. They are both weird to me. So, okay, what actually is a cult then? In simple terms, a cult is a high control group. What is considered a high control group is often assessed by using the BITE model. The BITE model is a tool created by Steven Hassan to categorize types of control placed on members of a community, and stands for behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotion control. Each of these categories has subsections beneath them of types of these behaviors. I won't be listing all of them as it's quite long, but I'll provide a few examples from each category and have the full list on screen. Some examples given in the BITE model for behavior control are to dictate where, how, and with whom the member lives or associates, or isolate them, instill dependency and obedience, major time spent with group indoctrination and rituals and or self-indoctrination, including the internet, and financial exploitation, manipulation, or dependence, along with a slew of violent actions or encouraging violent actions from members towards other members as punishment, and a lot of other things. A perfect example of behavior control is FLDS, which is a fundamentalist sect of Mormonism. FLDS members are expected to be polygamous and heterosexual, as well as not use birth control and have basically as many children as happens, which falls under the behavior control point of control with whom the members have sex, as well as another point under behavior control being controlling the clothing worn. Jehovah's Witnesses also use behavior control by punishing behaviors such as smoking, drinking, voting, or speaking to apostates through excommunication, also known as disfellowshipping. This is done through the Bite model criteria of instilling dependency and obedience and controlling with whom the members spend time or associate with. So if they are excommunicated, they lack social and often financial support, as Jehovah's Witnesses are also heavily discouraged from pursuing higher education, and many JWs own or work for businesses of other JWs or that serve JW communities. Some further examples of this in non-religious cults would be some alternative medicine and essential oils communities, where pursuing evidence-based medicine, even for life-threatening illness, can lead to excommunication and social ostracization. Or alt-right communities, where, for example, people like Kyle Rittenhouse, Mike Pence, and Joe Rogan have been attacked, ridiculed, or even claimed to be trans or gay, because these people are all horribly homophobic and transphobic, for saying they no longer support Donald Trump, which is both an attempt to control behavior by trying to influence the way this person votes, as well as controlling their behavior by isolating them from their social communities. The next category is information control. Some examples of information control from the Bite model are deception, deliberately withholding information, distorting information to make it more acceptable or systematically lying to the cult member, minimize or discourage access to non-cult sources of information, and compartmentalize information into outsider versus insider doctrines. A perfect example of this would be Jehovah's Witnesses being banned from reading material critical of their religion, their theology that basically everyone is out to get them and they will one day be persecuted by the government for their beliefs, and as such, any media outside of Watchtower approved or created sources are intentionally lying to them to make them stray from Jehovah. These would fall under both deception, as they distort the outsider media as well as classify it as such, as well as heavily discouraging and punishing the consumption of non-Watchtower media. They also fall under the information control section by using other members as spies. They encourage other members to snitch on each other for breaking rules and potentially making them guilty by association if they do not report banned behaviors. A non-religious cult example of this would be the MAGA and QAnon crowd, and their constant claims that anything that does not align with their views is fake news, is paid for by an evil left-wing cabal, or is controlled by a government that is out to get their leader. This is an example of deception. They distort media from an outsider group by presenting it as malicious and intentionally knowingly false. The next point on the list is thought control. Thought control is explained as some of the following things: use of loaded language and cliches, which constrict knowledge, stop critical thought, and reduce complexities into platitudes and buzzwords. Encourage only good and proper thoughts. Hypnotic techniques that are used to alter mental states, undermine critical thinking, and even to age regress the member. Forbid critical questions about the leader, doctrine, or policy allowed. And manipulate memories or create false memories. Scientology uses thought control through their e-meter, a device that's supposed to register emotional reactions and is used during auditing. Through auditing, the auditor creates false memories that further legitimize the beliefs of the religion. Auditing is also a part of behavior control as well, as it's extremely expensive to receive these sessions and creates a bit of a sunk cost fallacy in the member's brain, which also further encourages their desire to return and believe the things that they experience during the auditing session. Another example of thought control is through Mormonism. Mormons have a very heavy culture of toxic positivity, as well as a very intense purity culture. Sexual thoughts as well as homosexual thoughts are heavily discouraged. Though Mormons have made a bit of progress in this in the last few years, though still stating that you should not act on these thoughts, the idea of this generally stems from the Bible verse Matthew 5:27-28. Everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And you know, if I mention Mormons and thought-stopping techniques, I gotta mention the Book of Mormon. Sorry, my dog is named Elder Price. What did you expect? Thought-stopping techniques are one of the most well-known aspects of Mormonism, whether that's through their general attitudes when speaking with them, the actual purpose of Mormon garments, or through
turn it off like light switch, go flick. It's cool Mormon trick.
Mormons utilize the idea of good and bad thoughts through mainly discouraging and guilting people, as well as threats of divine punishment, for things ranging from lustful, gay, doubtful, critical, or even just normal negative thoughts. The last section of the Bite model is emotion control, and some of this does overlap with thought control. Some examples of this given are manipulate and narrow the range of feelings. Some emotions and/or needs are deemed as evil, wrong, or selfish. Teach emotion-stopping techniques to block feelings of homesickness, anger, or doubt. Instill fear, such as fear of thinking independently, the outside world, enemies, losing one's salvation, leaving or being shunned by the group, and others' disapproval. And ritualistic and sometimes public confessions of sins. I have personal experience with that last one, unfortunately. It was a very common practice at the cult that my high school friend was a part of. If you haven't heard that story, I'll have a link to that in the description, but Antioch utilized this method frequently, with children getting on stage and sobbing, screaming, or yelling about sins they've committed and begging for forgiveness at the end, often resulting in them collapsing on the ground or banging their heads or fists against the floor. After begging God and the congregation for forgiveness, the congregation would often come up on stage and place hands on them to pray. This was an extremely emotional part of the service, where other members would cry and beg God to forgive the person confessing as well, and often involved people sharing extremely private and personal things. A few examples that were particularly disturbing was a pretty young kid, probably around 12, publicly confessing to masturbating, and a teenage girl admitting that she had gay thoughts about someone else in the church who she actually named. There were also just frankly odd things that were disturbing in a different way, such as people sobbing that they're sorry they disobeyed their parents in a very normal way to do so, or playing a video game instead of reading their Bible, or someone who missed church whenever they were sick. These types of high emotion and extremely vulnerable experiences have actually been studied and have very profound psychological effects, and they can be extremely damaging to the people who experience them. My friend's brother was actually one of the people to get up on stage and do this, though I don't remember what he was confessing, as the entire time my friend was trying to convince me to do it as well. Ultimately, a cult does not have to check off every subcategory of every section on the Byte model to be as such. And many mainstream religions also check off a few or even a decent amount of things on the Byte model. Religions generally won't exist without some level of control, but the extreme at which cults go far exceeds this, and must meet a higher number of behaviors in each category to be qualified as such. While religions like Catholicism frequently utilize emotion control and use confession, hence the phrase Catholic guilt, they lack the extreme and unavoidable aspects that Antioch does. You can be a casual Catholic who doesn't go to confession, and that's pretty normal. You can't be a member of Antioch and do that. Islam uses behavior control aspects of controlling how people dress and what they eat. However, there are more moderate Muslims who still drink alcohol, own dogs, or eat pork, and even Muslim women who don't wear hijabs. As well as just the range of extremeness from hijab, which is fairly unimpeding to wear, versus a burqa, which impairs daily activities. There's no member of FLDS who's allowed to use birth control, who are allowed to wear the clothing that they wish to, or who are allowed to marry outside their religion without converting them first. All religions place some level of control on their members, and I find these aspects of mainstream religions that do fit the Byte model to be extremely harmful. I still think Catholic guilt is bad, I still think hijabs rely on misogyny, and I still think limiting your diet based on religious text is simply a means of control for control's sake. But ultimately, these things do not make something a cult, because it is not a high control group. There is the option to not follow these things, and in many cases, be able to have a community of people inside your religion who agree with the way you practice it. But a cult is all or nothing, and the all is all of your life, your actions, your thoughts, your feelings. So if you leave, you are left with nothing. To end the video off, I want to discuss one final thing. Many people see a religion doing something harmful and as a result assign it the label of cult. Cults are socially acceptable to be critical of, to be against, and because many religions do exhibit a few of the things from the Byte model, people are able to sometimes make a case that low control groups are actually cults. This is not helpful. Not only does it water down or misrepresent what a cult actually is, but it is perfectly acceptable to be critical of a religion that is not a cult. The social standard that religion is above criticism, that to criticize it is disrespectful, is one that needs to be abolished. If you see something or experience something about a religion that's wrong, or hurtful, or dangerous, you are allowed to call that out without calling it a cult and calling it what it is. By describing these things as cults whenever they're not, we undermine the experiences of cult members and ex-cult members, and uphold the standard that religion is special and above being criticized. Criticize them for what they are, because religion is not above that and it's not harmless, and it's okay to say that. Thanks for watching, guys. Ha det.
The children think too much, they've hardly a fear of God, always asking questions they should only wish away. Sundays every week with Father Montgomery, as they've gotten older they can hardly stay away.